Imagine walking into a police station to help solve a murder, knowing you're the one who committed it. In 1978, one man did exactly that, and the police had no idea they'd just hired the killer they were hunting. What happens when the monster volunteers to help catch himself? Subscribe to this channel, because some stories are too dark to tell only once. Paul Michael Stephany terrorized the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul between 1980 and 1982, killing at least 3 women and attacking several others. But before his arrest, before anyone knew his name, Stephany did something almost unthinkable. He called police after his attacks, sobbing, begging them to catch him, and even offered to help with the investigation. This is the story of a serial killer who couldn't stop himself, a pattern of violence that went undetected for years, and the twisted psychology of a man who simultaneously wanted to kill and wanted to be stopped. On New Year's Eve 1980, emergency dispatchers in St. Paul received a chilling phone call. A man's voice, shaking and crying, said he'd just beaten a woman and that he was sorry. The caller refused to give his location before hanging up. Hours later, police found Karen Potak, 19, lying in a snowbank with severe injuries to her head. An ice pick had been driven through her skull. She survived, but couldn't identify her attacker in the darkness. The crying caller became a pattern. June 3, 1981, Kimberly Compton, 18, was found dead in downtown St. Paul, her body showing signs of a brutal beating and stabbing. Within hours, the same sobbing voice called police again. "I just killed a girl," the man said, his voice breaking. "I don't know why I do it. God, I'm sorry." The call was brief, untraceable with 1981 technology. Police had a voice but no face, a confession but no suspect. Detectives began to realize they were dealing with someone deeply disturbed, someone who seemed to experience genuine remorse immediately after committing violence. July 21, 1982. Kathleen Greening, 33, was found drowned in her bathtub in St. Paul. The scene showed signs of a struggle. No call followed this time, which left investigators uncertain whether it was connected. Later analysis would link it to Stephany through circumstantial evidence and his eventual confession. August 6, 1982. Barbara Simons, 40, was stabbed to death near the banks of the Mississippi River. The familiar pattern returned within 24 hours. The sobbing caller contacted police. "I can't believe I did it again," he told the dispatcher, his voice thick with tears. "Please catch me before I do this again." This call was different. Stephany stayed on the line longer, and his desperation seemed to peak. 3 days later, on August 9, Stephany attacked Denise Williams, 19, near the University of Minnesota campus. Williams fought back harder than his previous victims. She scratched his face, tore at his clothes, and screamed until people nearby heard. Stephany fled, but this time he left behind something critical: his own blood and skin under Williams' fingernails. Williams survived and provided the first detailed description of her attacker. Here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Days after attacking Williams, Paul Stephany walked into a Minneapolis police station. He told officers he'd heard about the attacks and wanted to help. He claimed he knew the area where the latest assault occurred and might have seen something suspicious. Detectives, desperate for leads, interviewed him. Stephany was calm, cooperative, and seemingly concerned about the community's safety. He offered theories about the attacker's psychology. He suggested places police should look. He was, in essence, consulting on his own crimes. No one suspected him. He didn't match the initial description witnesses had given, and he presented himself as a concerned citizen. But police still had Denise Williams' evidence. When forensic results came back matching the DNA profile from her attacker, investigators began cross-referencing anyone who'd been near the crime scenes. Paul Stephany's name appeared in their volunteer interview logs. On a hunch, detectives asked Stephany to come back for a follow-up conversation. This time they took a DNA sample. It matched. On September 3, 1982, Paul Michael Stephany was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. The case against Stephany rested on several pillars of evidence, each documented carefully by investigators working across multiple jurisdictions. DNA evidence from Denise Williams' defensive wounds matched Stephany's genetic profile with what prosecutors called scientific certainty, given 1982 testing capabilities. Williams also identified Stephany in a photo lineup and later in court. Fibers found on Kimberly Compton's body matched the interior of Stephany's vehicle. a 1977 AMC Pacer registered in his name. Toolmark analysis linked an ice pick found in Stephanie's apartment to the wounds on Karen Patak, though this evidence was described by the defense as circumstantial. Voice analysis compared the crying caller's recorded calls to Stephanie's voice. Experts testified that 12 distinct speech patterns matched, including vocal stress indicators and regional accent markers. The defense argued voice analysis was not definitive science, a debate that continued throughout the trial. After his arrest, Stephanie gave a partial confession to detectives, admitting to the attacks but claiming he couldn't remember specific details during the acts themselves. He described blackouts and overwhelming urges he said he couldn't control. Psychiatrists would later dispute whether this represented genuine dissociation or a calculated legal strategy. Stephanie's defense team argued he suffered from a dissociative disorder that made him unable to form intent during his crimes. Prosecution psychiatrists countered that his ability to call police, express remorse, and later volunteer to help showed clear consciousness and planning ability. The jury ultimately sided with prosecutors, but the question of Stephanie's mental state remains debated in criminal psychology literature. Investigators suspected Stephanie in several additional unsolved cases from the late 1970s, including 2 Jane Doe murders in Wisconsin. However, evidence was insufficient to charge him, and these cases remain officially unsolved. Experts have offered competing theories about why Stephanie walked into that police station. Some suggest he experienced genuine guilt and subconsciously wanted capture. Others argue he sought to monitor the investigation and steer it away from himself, a calculated risk that ultimately backfired. A third perspective suggests Stephanie may have been testing boundaries, enjoying the thrill of deception as much as the violence itself. The truth likely died with him. 3 women lost their lives: Kimberly Compton, Kathleen Greening, and Barbara Simons. Each had families who spent decades living with unanswered questions and unimaginable grief. Compton was a recent high school graduate planning to attend community college. Simons was a mother of 2. Greening worked as a healthcare aide. Karen Patak and Denise Williams survived their attacks, but carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Williams testified that she had nightmares for years about the moment Stephanie attacked her, and credited her survival to pure instinct and the strangers who heard her screams. The families of unsolved cases potentially linked to Stephanie never received closure. They were left in a gray zone where suspicion existed but proof did not. Stephanie represents a rare but documented phenomenon in criminal psychology, the offender who simultaneously commits violence and seeks intervention. Think of it like someone caught between 2 opposing forces inside their own mind, one driving them toward harm, the other recoiling in horror at what they've done. Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist who reviewed the case years later, noted that Stephanie's calls showed genuine emotional distress, which distinguished him from killers who contact police purely for manipulation or attention. The tears were real, but they didn't stop the next attack. When Stephanie walked into that police station, he was engaging in what psychologists call approach behavior, moving closer to the very thing he should have been fleeing. This suggests either extreme arrogance, profound self-destructive impulses, or both operating simultaneously. Compare this to other cases where offenders inserted themselves into investigations, like arsonists who volunteer as firefighters or killers who attend their victims' vigils. The difference is Stephanie openly offered to help catch himself, crossing a line most don't. The case also exposed limitations in how police departments shared information in the early 1980s. The Twin Cities are separate jurisdictions, and coordination between departments was slower than it needed to be. If investigators had connected the dots between the crying calls and the volunteer citizens sooner, lives might have been saved. Modern systems like VKAP, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, were developed partly in response to cases like Stephanie's, creating databases that help link crimes across jurisdictions. We know Paul Stephanie killed at least 3 women, called police in tears after attacks, and brazenly volunteered to help catch himself. We don't fully understand why someone capable of such violence would simultaneously seek capture, or whether he could have stopped himself if given the help he claimed to want. What we know for certain is that his arrest only came after a survivor, fought back hard enough to leave evidence behind. The Stephanie case is closed. He was convicted in 1983 of 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and multiple counts of attempted murder. He received a 40-year sentence and died in prison of skin cancer on June 1998 at age 53. Confidence high. These are documented historical facts. Advances in DNA technology mean cold cases potentially linked to Stephanie could still be solved. If biological evidence was preserved from the Wisconsin Jane Doe cases or other suspected attacks, modern forensic genealogy techniques might confirm or rule out his involvement. Confidence. Medium depends on evidence preservation and resource allocation. The Stephanie case continues to be studied in criminal psychology and law enforcement training programs. Each analysis of his self-reporting behavior adds to our understanding of how some offenders experience internal conflict, which can inform interviewing techniques and prevention strategies. Confidence high, ongoing academic and professional interest is documented. Paul Stephanie wanted to be caught, but not enough to stop killing. That contradiction cost lives and left scars that never fully heal. The story raises uncomfortable questions about free will, mental illness, and whether someone truly dangerous can also be a victim of their own mind. There are no clean answers, only the facts of what happened, and the families left to carry the weight of what was lost. If you want to understand more about how investigators profile serial offenders and predict behavior, watch How the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit Changed Criminal Investigation Forever.